Sweet. Hi, I'm Isabella Logan. I'm a digital accessibility specialist here at Accessible Web. And today I'm going to be presenting the webinar Agencies. Are you ready for ADA Title II? Sweet. So to start off, I'm going to be going over the agenda for what I'm going to be talking about in this webinar. So first, I'm going to talk about key compliance deadlines and compliance information. From there, I'll talk about exceptions to ADA Title II. Then I'll talk about immediate next steps you should take as a third-party provider, and then what to do after the deadline passes. Okay. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the laws and deadlines for local and state governments established by ADA Title II. ADA Title II has been around for a long time, but recently in April of 2024, they came out with a new ruling about the technical standards for digital accessibility that public entities should meet. So, a public entity is going to include any public education, public transportation, court services, voting and healthcare, and other government entities. The deadline for compliance is going to be based off of your total population that the public entity is serving. In most cases, it's going to be determined by your census population. So public entities that have a total population of 50,000 or more have the deadline of April 24th, 2026, while public entities with less than that and special district governments are going to have the deadline of April 2027. So this ruling has made the technical standards that public entities need to meet be the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 AA. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear me refer to this as either WCAG or WCAG. So, what needs to meet WCAG 2.1 AA? So, any websites, mobile applications, social media posts, conventional electronic documents that are provided by a government entity. So a conventional electronic document is also going to be called a CED. These are going to include any word processing documents, PDFs, spreadsheets, and presentations such as a Google Slides or PowerPoint. So it's important to note that this compliance deadline is going to include any products that are provided by a third party on the public entity's behalf. So that includes contracts and any other method of procurement of a third party product. So what is WCAG 2.1 AA? So it is a internationally recognized standard that ensures that digital content is accessible to all users. It provides a framework for making web content accessible. You have a list of success criteria that websites should be meeting to be compliant with this. So this list of success criterias are going to be based off of something called the POUR principles, which stand for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So the first one's going to be perceivable. So perceivable information and user interface components must be presented to users in ways that they can perceive. So an example of this would be having text alternatives for meaningful pictures. The second principle is going to be operable. This means that user interface components and navigation should be operable to all users. An example of this would be making sure that all website functionality is operable just using keyboard alone. The third principle is going to be understandable. Information in the operation of user interface components must be understandable. So, an example of this principle would be making sure that a page's default human language can be determined programmatically. And then our fourth principle is going to be robust. Content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents. So, this includes assistive technology. So an example of this would be making sure that each component on a website has a correct programmatically determined role. Okay, quick water. So now we're going to move on to the exceptions. There's quite a few important exceptions to ADA Title II. The first is going to be for archived web content. So this content needs to meet four criteria to be considered for this exception. First, it must predate the rule. Yeah, must have been made before the compliance deadline. Second, it must be kept only for reference, research, and record-keeping purposes. Third, it must be kept in a clearly marked archive section of the website. And fourth, it must have not been changed since it was originally archived. So, a good example of this would be a water quality report from the 1990s that a state has stored in the archive section of its website and has not been updated since that original date. This page would meet the criteria for this exception. This is because the content was made before the compliance deadline, is used for record keeping purposes, and it's kept in within an archived area of the website, and it hasn't been updated since it was originally made. An example of a page that would not meet this exception criteria would be a page that was created in 2017 that tells users information about how to apply for zoning permits. This information is not kept in an archived area, and it's still the most up-to-date information for how a user can get a zoning permit. Although this was created before the compliance deadline, it is still in current use and it's not found within a archived area of the website, so this wouldn't meet that exception criteria. The next exception is going to be for pre-existing conventional electronic documents, again known as a CED. There are three criteria that must be met for this exception. So first, it must be a CED. So, your word processing files, PDFs, spreadsheets, and slideshows. Second, it must be available on the application before the compliance deadline. And third, it must not be currently used to participate in the public entity. So an example of this exception would be a PDF flyer that was uploaded to a website in 2017 for city's farmers market that took place in 2017. This would meet that exception criteria because the event happened in 2017, it got uploaded to the website in 2017, and because it meets that CED requirement by being a PDF. Something that wouldn't count in this exception would be if you had a PDF voter registration form that was state uploaded in 2020. It's still used for voter registration. Although this was uploaded before the compliance deadline and it does meet the CED requirement of being a PDF, the form is still in active use and must be made accessible. So we're going to go on to the last three exceptions. The next one is going to be about content posted by a third party, not on behalf of the public entity. So to meet this exception, it must have been posted by the third party and not the government entity, and it cannot be posted on behalf of the public entity or because of contractual reasons with the public entity. So if a public entity has a contractor who bids a website for them, the contractor's personal social media feed isn't going to have to be compliant with WCAG 2.1 AA. But if a public entity hires a contractor to post on social media on their behalf, that social media post has to be made compliant. And the next one's going to tie into this. Any social media posts made before the compliance deadline aren't going to have to be accessible, only the ones that are made after the deadline. And the final exception is going to be for individualized password protected CEDs. So there are three criteria that you need to meet to be counted for this exception. First, it has to be a conventional electronic document. Two, it has to be individualized, so for a specific person. And three, it must be a password protected document. So something like a personal water bill that is behind a login screen and is a PDF is going to count as this exception because it's only for one individual, it's behind that password protected account, and it's a CED. But it's important to note that anything that's behind a password protected area must be compliant until you get to the CED. So the process of opening up that CED and logging in has to be made compliant, but that PDF itself doesn't have to be if it's individualized. So another example would be if a public entity posts a PDF document on a password protected website about rate increases for all customers. This exception wouldn't apply because this PDF is meant for all customers and wouldn't be uh, counted as an exception. One moment. Sweet. Okay. So, what are the immediate next steps? So first, I would review all laws and regulations that apply to your customers. So all state and local government entities are going to be covered by ADA Title II, but some states and local governments are going to have additional accessibility laws in place. So some examples that I have found, there are kind of three key things I've seen in individualized state and local government laws that are going to affect this compliance. So first, it's going to be some compliance deadlines. For example, Colorado has laws about compliance deadline of being in 2025 instead of the 2026 or 2027 date. The second one I see quite a bit are going to be states that have additional reporting requirements. For example, California has some rules about additional certifications of compliance that are signed by government officials being displayed on websites to show compliance. And the third that I've seen quite a bit are going to be additional technical requirements for state and local governments. An example of this is going to be that Massachusetts has a rule about certain government entity websites not being allowed to have accessibility overlays. And again, I'm a digital accessibility specialist. I am not a lawyer, so always get a lawyer to look over this before you make these changes or determine to do something. This is just my understanding and some small examples I'm giving. Okay. I would then perform an accessibility audit and get a VPAT for your current web content. So this is going to involve both automated and manual auditing of your product. Automated scanning is going to only find around 30% of your accessibility errors. So going through and performing manual audits is going to be crucial to meeting your compliance goals. It's also going to be big to get a VPAT. A VPAT is called a vol is stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, or you'll also hear it's a type of something that you'll hear called a ACR, Accessibility Conformance Report. It basically lists all these WCAG success criteria and how your website or digital product conforms to each one. The majority of times when government entities are going to approach you as a third-party contractor about accessibility, they're going to be looking for the VPAT for the product. This is really good information for them to have and gives you a good starting place to talk about accessibility. Next, I would immediately get to fixing your high priority accessibility issues. So any key operability that isn't functional to users of assistive technology should be prioritized, and accessibility issues that are found across multiple pages should be prioritized in this part. I would also add in this stage, use user testing of users with assistive technology. I think that's a really good part of the process to do that in if you have the time and resources. So next, I would also develop a plan for CED remediation. CED remediation is going to be a massive undertaking and is probably going to be one of the most complex parts of the process. I would start by taking inventory of all CEDs and compiling a list of the documents that don't meet those exceptions. And from there, I would figure out how to fix them in-house or who to send them off to get them remediated. And then it's also really important to ensure that you, as the third party contractor to a government entity, you guys are on the same page when it comes to compliance standards. Communicate about who is responsible for different parts of the compliance deadline, such as CEDs. Is that on them? Is that on you? And then always make sure you're on the same page about the laws that you're adhering to. So once this deadline passes, what steps should you be taking? So first, I would keep up to date with any potential laws or regulations that may affect your customers. Things are always changing, so always being the most up to date about what your digital product's conformance level has to be is great. Then I would also perform user testing with users of assistive technology. Just because your website meets the appropriate compliance standards doesn't mean it's the best experience for users of assistive technology. So getting input from those assistive technology users is going to be crucial to making sure your website's accessible. I would also incorporate accessibility into your design process. It's way easier to make a website accessible from the beginning of the process instead of the end of the process. I would ensure that developers have access to accessibility training and are really taking it in their to mind when they're designing new products. I would also continue the process of performing manual audits and doing remediations. Just because your website might be accessible at one point in time, changes are going to be made, and there's a pretty good chance that your conformance is going to drop at some point. By continuing to have an audit cycle in place, you can audit your web content and ensure a consistent, accessible experience for everybody. So, how can Accessible Web help you? So, first, we offer website accessibility software. So, these tools automate and facilitate continuous compliance with updated accessibility standards. I believe we've already shared a coupon code for that. Next is going to be consulting and training. We have expert guidance and training sections on implementing and maintaining accessibility standards. We also do accessibility audits. So this is going to be a comprehensive evaluation of web and mobile applications to identify compliance gaps with WCAG 2.2 level AA. This will also cover those WCAG 2.1 AA criteria that you need to meet for ADA Title II. Then we can also make those voluntary product accessibility templates, the VPATs. So, the documents about how your technology meets certain accessibility standards. And it's really important for the procurement process in a lot of places. So I recommend getting that. Sweet. And now it's discussion time. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat.